I hadn't stepped into a family event like this in years, but the moment I walked into the country club, the air told me nothing had really changed. The chandeliers glowed, the white tablecloths gleamed, and the servers moved gracefully with trays of champagne. On the surface, it was everything you'd expect from a Houston engagement dinner. But I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the reminder that appearances in Texas often meant more than truth. Texans are proud of our manners, proud of putting on charm even when the foundations are cracked. At 35, I was no stranger to rooms like this. I had built my life in Houston, fighting my way into the oil and real estate market, proving I could stand on my own. That part of me walked in with my head high. But the girl who had been pushed aside at 15 still lingered quietly inside, whispering to me that family gatherings were dangerous ground. I reminded myself of something I once read. Family is supposed to be your safe place, but sometimes it's where the deepest cuts come from. As I handed my coat to the attendant, I let my eyes sweep across the room. People mingled, laughter carried through the air, forks chimed against china. My mother, Terrace, was seated with a group of relatives, animated in her storytelling. My brother Oren sat at the center of attention, leaning close to his fiancée, Vera, who seemed to radiate ownership of the evening. I straightened my shoulders and began to make my way through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces that returned only polite smiles. It felt like stepping back into a play I had never been allowed to rehearse for, a production staged long before I arrived. Vera spotted me before I could decide how to approach her. She rose gracefully from her seat and walked toward me, every step measured, every gesture precise. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. When she reached me, her gaze flicked downward to my shoes, then climbed slowly up my dress, pausing deliberately at my necklace before landing on my face. It was a scan more than a greeting. "Artis," she said, her tone smooth as silk, though it carried something sharp beneath. "We want everything about this wedding to be classy, not complicated." Her words hung between us, heavy, deliberate. For anyone listening, it could have sounded like a harmless comment, but I knew better. It was a line drawn in the sand, spoken loudly enough that two nearby guests turned their heads. I held her eyes, refusing to drop my gaze. "I'm sure you'll have exactly the wedding you want," I replied evenly, letting my voice carry calm. She tilted her head, satisfied perhaps that she had delivered her message. Behind her, Oren gave a small, uneasy smile, but said nothing. A couple of cousins glanced at us, then quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. In Texas families, people know how to ignore the uncomfortable. It's almost an art form. As Vera turned back toward the main table, I could feel heat rising in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but a tightening that told me I had just been placed exactly where she wanted me, on the outside. I drifted toward the seating chart posted elegantly on a stand near the entrance to the dining area. Gold script announced "Our guests," and below, rows of names were carefully printed and arranged by table. My eyes searched the list once, then again, tracing carefully across each column. My name wasn't there. I leaned closer, certain I had missed it. My last name, Kaylin, should have been easy to spot, but the list jumped from Kaufman to Keller without a pause. My pulse quickened, though my face remained still. A middle-aged guest beside me glanced at the board too, and then turned with a smile. "Oh," she said lightly, "I thought you were the sister." "I am," I answered, steady. Her smile faltered slightly, and she excused herself, stepping away quickly. I stood there for another moment, staring at the elegant chart that told the truth no one else wanted to say aloud. I wasn't considered part of the circle that mattered. The déjà vu hit hard. I was 15 again, standing with one small suitcase outside a foster home as the car that had left me there pulled away. Being erased once had carved a scar. Seeing it replayed here, 2 decades later, pressed into me like salt in an old wound. Inside my mind, a phrase I'd once heard echoed, "If you're not at the table, you're on the menu." Tonight, the seating chart made that literal. I stepped back from the board, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and forced a faint smile as a waiter passed by offering wine. I accepted a glass, letting the cool stem anchor my hand. The dinner moved forward. Guests found their seats, laughter rose again, and I moved quietly to the back where an empty chair had been placed without ceremony, near the doors where servers came and went. Every clang of the kitchen, every draft of cool air reminded me that I had been placed on the margins, just close enough to observe, far enough to be dismissed. But I reminded myself of something Texans pride themselves on: grit and grace. You don't show weakness at the table. You don't give people the satisfaction of watching you crumble. So I smiled when waiters asked if I was comfortable. I nodded politely when relatives walked by without stopping. And inside, I said to myself, "You've been here before. You survived then. You will not be broken now." I sipped my wine slowly, rehearsing the mask I had learned long ago. Calm, polite, untouchable. That mask had carried me through boardrooms and negotiations. It would carry me through this night too. As the evening stretched on, my eyes found Vera across the room. She caught my gaze, and a subtle smirk played on her lips before she turned back to Oren, laughing softly into his shoulder. It was clear, the erasure wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, orchestrated. Inside, I whispered to myself, "They've done this before. But this time, I'm not 15 anymore. Because the first cut may bleed, but the second makes you sharp." The clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter filled the dining room as a waiter motioned me toward a chair. I followed him, carrying the glass of wine I'd accepted earlier, still trying to steady my nerves after realizing my name had been missing from the seating chart. He stopped near the back of the room, just beside a set of double doors where staff carried trays in and out. "Ma'am," he said, pulling the chair out for me, "this is the only space left." I glanced around. The chair was tucked close to the restrooms. Every few moments, the sound of flushing carried faintly over the music. Servers pushed past with carts of plates, apologizing softly as they bumped the chair legs. I gave him a polite nod, smoothing the skirt of my dress before I sat. "Of course," I replied evenly. "Thank you." But inside, the sting deepened. People in Texas say you can tell how much someone values you by where they sit you. Tonight, I wasn't just placed at the children's table, I was set beside the door, like a guest they hoped would slip away unnoticed. I crossed my legs and rested my wine glass on the table, forcing a smile at passing relatives who walked quickly past without stopping. The humiliation pressed heavy on me, but I refused to show it. From this seat, I had a perfect view of the main table. Oren and Vera sat at the center, bathed in light, surrounded by laughter and glasses raised in toast. Vera leaned into him, whispering something that made him grin nervously. Around them, relatives cheered, clapping as though they were royalty. I lifted my glass slowly, watching the performance unfold. The waitstaff brought another round of appetizers, weaving past me as if I were part of the furniture. I caught snippets of conversation from the table nearest me. "She really pulled this together beautifully," one of the older aunts said, eyes on Vera. Another nodded. "Yes, everything feels so elegant, doesn't it? She has such a gift for planning." I let the words wash over me, biting back a laugh that wasn't amusement. Every flower arrangement, every menu, every contract had passed through my hands. Not hers. My name was on the agreements, my accounts had covered deposits. Yet here I was, invisible, while she basked in praise for a dream built on my work. The sense of invisibility grew thicker with every clink of silverware. It wasn't just that I had been erased from the list, it was that everyone accepted the erasure without question. Seating charts in Southern weddings weren't just about organization, they were subtle declarations of power. And tonight, that declaration was clear. I didn't matter. I stared at my untouched appetizer, the noise around me blurring into a steady hum, until a phrase I'd once heard from a Texas business mentor returned to me. "If you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu." The words cut sharper than the silver knife lying in front of me. As I tried to steady myself, two women at the table behind me leaned closer together, their voices lowering. They must have thought the clatter of dishes would drown them out, but their whispers drifted clear. "She's the one who was abandoned, right?" one murmured. The other answered quickly, "Yes, that's her. Poor thing. But honestly, she doesn't really belong here, does she?" They didn't know I could hear. Or maybe they didn't care. Their voices held that familiar mixture of pity and disdain, the kind that cuts both ways. The word abandoned struck like a stone to the chest. My fingers tightened around my wine glass, and I stared at the condensation dripping down its stem. I was 15 again, standing outside a foster home in Austin with only one bag, watching the car that left me speed away. That single word carried me back into the cold air of that night. I forced my face to stay calm, my posture steady. Fury burned just under my skin, but outwardly, I remained composed. If they see me flinch, I told myself silently, they win. I took another sip of wine, letting the cool liquid slide down slowly. Inside, my heart pounded with the memory, but I knew better than to give anyone here the satisfaction of watching me break. Across the room, the toasts continued, louder and merrier. I sat still, a quiet storm beneath the surface. In America, people like to say family raises you, but sometimes family doesn't raise you at all. It wounds you. The whispers still rang in my ears, but I chose not to confront them. Instead, I reached for the bread basket, tore a piece carefully, and ate slowly. I smiled faintly when a passing waiter asked if I needed anything more. "No, I'm fine," I said smoothly, but fine wasn't the word. Every insult, every erasure stacked quietly inside me. Still, I reminded myself of what they couldn't see, the folder of contracts in my desk drawer at home, the foundation of $2 billion they relied on but never acknowledged. They thought humiliation would silence me. Instead, it became fuel. Texans have a saying, grit and grace, smile sweet, plan sharp. That was the mantra echoing inside me as I straightened my shoulders and kept eating. I had learned long ago that silence can be the sharpest blade if you know when to draw it. When I looked up again, I saw Vera leaning toward Oren, her laughter lilting through the air. She turned her head just slightly, eyes landing on me for the briefest moment. A smirk tugged at her lips, subtle but unmistakable, and suddenly, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't oversight. This was design. They had built this exclusion carefully, brick by brick, hoping I'd either not notice or simply swallow it the way I always had. But not anymore. Inside, I whispered to myself, and designs I know can always be undone. The word abandoned lingered in my ear long after the whispers faded. My body stiffened, my fork paused above the plate as the laughter and clinking glasses around me seemed to dull, like a radio fading into static. It was as though someone had cracked open an old wound I'd spent years covering with careful stitches. That single word carried me away from the polished walls of the country club and hurled me back to a night when I was 15. My chest tightened as if my ribs were remembering what it felt like to breathe through betrayal. I stared at the polished surface of the table in front of me, seeing not my reflection, but a shadow of the girl I once was. I had promised myself long ago that I wouldn't let this family break me again. Yet here, at 35, surrounded by my own blood, it felt like history had found a cruel way to repeat itself. Sometimes, the second wound reopens the first cut. People like to say time heals everything, but I've learned that isn't true. Time doesn't erase scars. It just teaches you how to hide them under your sleeves. The memory unfolded in detail so sharp I could smell the rain. I was standing outside the faded brick foster home in Austin, the kind of building with paint that had peeled from years of neglect. A single streetlight flickered above the gate. My suitcase, a cheap frayed thing bought at a discount store, sat beside me, and inside it were all the belongings my mother thought I deserved to carry forward. The car door slammed, and I turned toward her, hoping she'd change her mind, hoping she'd take me back home. But she didn't look at me. Her eyes were on the steering wheel, her hands gripping it tight. "This is for your own good," she said. Her voice was clipped, as though reciting a line she'd convinced herself was true. "For my own good?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "You're leaving me here." She didn't answer. The taillights glowed red, then blurred as the car rolled forward, carrying her away. I remember running a few steps after it, calling her name, but the sound of the engine drowned me out. Within seconds, I was alone under that flickering streetlight, Disposable, left behind like a burden no one wanted to carry. The sting of that night didn't fade. It carved something permanent into me, the certainty that I wasn't worth the cost of keeping. Now, 20 years later, staring at a seating chart that had quietly erased me from the wedding of the very brother I once protected, I felt the same hollow space open inside. Being cut from a guest list at 35 felt the same as being left on a curb at 15. Erasure carries the same chill no matter how it's dressed up. But the story didn't end at that curb. Abandonment didn't kill me. It lit something in me. I worked through high school taking 2 jobs, one at a diner serving coffee to truckers through the night, another at a grocery store stocking shelves before dawn. The exhaustion clung to me, but so did determination. When my classmates talked about parties and road trips, I talked about scholarships. I earned every dollar I could because I refused to let being thrown away define where I'd land. When I finally stepped into my first apartment in Houston, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I laughed bitterly. The place had cockroaches that scattered when the lights flicked on and a heater that rattled like it was coughing its last breath. But it was mine. Every inch was proof I hadn't vanished. I clawed my way into the oil and real estate industry, a world dominated by men who looked at me and assumed I didn't belong. I let them underestimate me. While they were dismissing me, I was signing deals. Slowly, brick by brick, I built a career. Deals grew into properties, properties into portfolios. I remember sitting at my desk one late night, contracts spread around me, thinking they thought I'd vanish. Instead, I became the storm they can't ignore. Eleanor Roosevelt's words became my compass. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I repeated that line like a prayer when boardrooms turned hostile, when family calls went unanswered, when the silence from those who should have loved me most became deafening. And yes, I succeeded. But success, as I would later learn, doesn't erase scars. It just makes them easier to cover. You can wear a designer suit over wounds and no one will see, but you will always feel them ache when the weather shifts. That ache whispered inside me now, watching Vera sit at the center of praise for a celebration I had bankrolled. I felt pride for the empire I had built, but loneliness pressed against it like a shadow. America loves stories of the self-made, but what they don't tell you is that self-made often means standing alone. I compared the 15-year-old girl with the 35-year-old woman I had become. At 15, I carried a suitcase no one cared to hold. At 35, I carried the weight of a $2 billion foundation that financed this family's glittering event. The difference between then and now wasn't just years, it was power. And yet, here I was again, erased from the circle that should have claimed me. I thought, I've always had to buy my seat at their table, and even then, they pushed the chair away. For the first time, I questioned why I kept doing it, why I kept funding, forgiving, forcing myself to belong in a family that never wanted me fully there. I let the thought settle, simmering under the surface. Maybe this wasn't just about humiliation anymore. Maybe this was about rewriting the rules. The sound of laughter pulled me back into the present. The memory faded, but the sting lingered. I realized my hand was gripping the edge of the chair so hard, my knuckles whitened. I released it slowly, inhaled deeply, and let my gaze sweep the room again. Inside, a resolve formed. I told myself clearly, I will not be erased again. Not in this room, not in this life. Because silence may have buried me at 15, but now silence will bury them. The echo of that memory, the foster home, the suitcase, faded as the sound of forks scraping plates pulled me back to the dinner hall. The room was buzzing again, a chorus of laughter and glasses clinking. At the main table, Oren and Vera shone under the lights, surrounded by family like a king and queen on their throne. From my seat tucked near the service doors, I felt the difference in placement as clearly as if a wall stood between us. I studied the scene with a calm expression, but inside, thoughts churned. In Southern families, the dinner table is more than a place to eat. It's a map of power. Who sits closest? Who gets the center seat? Who is pushed to the margins? It says everything about respect and belonging. I remembered something a mentor once told me. Respect is not demanded, it's displayed in how you treat the quietest person in the room. By that measure, this family had declared me irrelevant. I folded my napkin neatly across my lap and watched, waiting. There was a part of me that almost wanted to hear what would come next, like I was bracing for the blow. It arrived sooner than I expected. During the main course, Vera lifted her glass halfway and said with a smile too polished to be warm, "You know, some people just don't fit the image we want for this wedding." Her voice carried just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The air shifted instantly. A nervous chuckle rose from a cousin. A few others glanced at me and then quickly looked away, fixing their eyes on their plates. One guest, trying to soften the sting, leaned in and said, "Oh, she means no offense." But offense was exactly the intent. I lowered my fork slowly, placing it carefully on the plate, as though the moment demanded a kind of ritual. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. The humiliation wasn't in the words alone, it was in the setting. Public disgrace burned sharper than anything whispered in private. I remembered being a teenager, standing on the sidelines at school dances because no one wanted to partner with me. I remembered teachers patting Oren on the back for mediocrity while my honors went unnoticed. It was the same pattern, dressed up in nicer clothes. The fury that rose inside me was real, but I knew better than to let it spill out. Smart silence, I reminded myself. Strategy. They expected me to make a scene. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I sipped my water and looked down the table. People avoided my gaze, pretending not to notice. The performance was working. Vera smiled as if she'd won, and Oren, my brother, shifted in his chair. Oren was right there, sitting beside her. He heard everything. His fork scraped against his plate in uneven strokes, his shoulders hunched slightly, and his eyes darted toward me for a split second before looking away. I waited for him to say something, anything. To tell her to stop, to stand for me the way I had stood for him countless times. But he didn't. His silence was louder than her words. He fidgeted, cleared his throat once, but no defense came. I felt a cold weight settle over me, heavier than Vera's remark. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly, staring at its food while the knife twists. I thought of something I once read. All that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And here it was, happening in real time. My brother wasn't cruel by nature, but silence can wound as much as any insult. Inside, I thought, enemies don't hurt you the way family silence does. The people you protect, the ones you think will always shield you. That's where betrayal cuts deepest. I folded my hands neatly in my lap, as if to anchor myself. I felt my heart pound, but my face remained calm, even kind. Let them believe they'd succeeded. Let them believe silence meant defeat. I studied the faces around the table, committing each one to memory. The cousins who looked away, the uncle who laughed nervously, the aunt who nodded approvingly at Vera's remark. Each face told me where their loyalties lay. This was no longer just about exclusion. It was about clarity. I decided then and there that I wouldn't lash out. Southern grit isn't about loud retaliation. It's about playing the long game. They thought humiliation would leave me weakened, but what it truly did was sharpen me. If they think I'll break, I told myself, they've forgotten who I am. I knew a storm was coming. The warning signs were all here, written across their faces, wrapped in the silence of my brother and the sweetness of Vera's venom. I wouldn't be their easy target. Toward the end of the meal, Vera raised her glass high. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes cut sharp as blades when they found mine. "To family," she said, her voice ringing through the room. I met her stare with a calm smile of my own, lifting my glass slowly. Outwardly composed, inwardly seething. The line had been crossed, because once you learn to live through silence, the first sound of defiance is deafening. The morning light spilled across my condo in downtown Houston, painting the glass walls in a golden haze. From the 22nd floor, I could see the city stretching outward, the cranes, the office towers, the endless rhythm of cars already crowding the freeways. Normally, that view grounded me, reminded me of the empire I had built from nothing. But today, it felt muted, as if even the skyline knew something was about to shift. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, my mind still replaying the dinner. Vera's cutting words, the polite laughter, the way my brother's silence hung heavier than her insult. Those details clung to me, whispering over and over, "You don't belong here." The vibration of my phone on the marble counter startled me. I froze for a second, staring at the screen before I picked it up. A message notification blinked, her name sitting smugly at the top. I didn't want to open it. Still, my thumb slid across, and the words appeared. "We've decided to keep the wedding small, drama-free. Hope you understand." I read it once, then again, and then a third time, my pulse quickening with every repetition. Small, drama-free. Hope you understand. Each word had been chosen like a knife, designed to sound harmless while cutting deep. Small was a lie. I had seen the guest lists. Drama-free was code for me. Hope you understand was a dismissal dressed as politeness. I whispered into the empty room. Drama. I paid for every detail you're calling simple. My phone shook slightly in my grip. This wasn't a request. It wasn't a conversation. It was an eviction. I wasn't being told to sit at the back. I was being told not to sit at all. Exclusion, I realized, is sharpest when it hides under courtesy. The coffee mug clinked against the counter as I set it down, my fingers trembling, not from weakness but from anger taking form. Instinct drove me to call the one person I still thought might see me, my mother. I pressed her name, the familiar number ringing. She answered on the second ring, her voice brisk, as though she already knew why I was calling. "Mom," I said, my throat tight. "They just told me I'm not welcome." Vera sent a text saying they're keeping it small and drama-free. There was a pause on the line, long enough that for a second I believed she might be shocked, might finally stand with me. But her words landed cold. "Artis, don't make this about you. It's Oren's big day." My grip tightened around the phone. "Not about me? I've paid for everything they're calling theirs. And now they erase me, and you're telling me not to make it about me?" Her sigh carried through the speaker. "You've always been the strong one. You don't need the spotlight. Let them have their peace." "Peace?" My voice rose, but I kept it measured, steady. "Do you even hear yourself? You're excusing cruelty because it's convenient. You did it when I was 15 and you're doing it now." "Artis," she said sharply, "stop dredging up the past. Families do what they must. Don't ruin this." I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter. The déjà vu struck hard. History wasn't just repeating, it was continuing, unbroken. My mother had always chosen the golden boy. She had always told me to let it go, to stay quiet. I remembered a phrase I once heard. When family excuses cruelty as tradition, it isn't love. It's neglect in costume. And I felt its truth burn into me now. Her voice softened, almost weary. "Please, just let it go." I lowered the phone slowly, ending the call without another word. The silence in my condo pressed down heavy. I stared at the text again, the words glowing smugly on the screen. They thought they could erase me quietly, that I would take it like I always had. But silence, I realized, had been my prison for too long. Now, it could become my weapon. They thought I didn't belong. Then I would show them what belonging costs. I turned, walked across the room, and pulled open the drawer of my desk. Inside lay the folder, thick with contracts. Venue, catering, flowers, photography, all signed under my name, all held firmly in my control. My fingers brushed across the papers, the ink of my signature as sharp now as the day I had written it. "You wanted me erased," I murmured, my voice steady, cold. "You forgot who signed your name into existence. Because you can't exile the one holding the deed." 2 days passed, and the anger that had burned so hot inside me settled into something sharper, clarity. I sat at my desk, morning light stretching across the condo, and unlocked the drawer I had avoided opening for weeks. Inside was the thick folder, heavy with contracts. I slid it out slowly, setting it on the desk as though I were laying down a weapon. I flipped the cover open. Page after page bore my name at the bottom, my signature anchoring every agreement. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer. My handwriting wasn't just ink, it was authority. These weren't theirs to control, no matter how loudly they claimed the spotlight. "You wanted me gone?" I whispered to the empty room. "Then these signatures will follow you." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling, a strange calm washing over me. In American law, the name on the line is the power. In Texas, contracts are the bones of business. Charm and smiles may sell stories, but the signature decides reality. I had learned that lesson long ago. Knowledge was leverage, silence was strength, until the moment you chose to speak through action. That evening, I attended the rehearsal dinner planning session, held in a smaller hall adjacent to the venue itself. Vera stood near the front, speaking with animated gestures, presenting herself as though she alone had orchestrated everything. Family members leaned in, nodding, while vendors hovered politely with clipboards and tablets. I found a chair off to the side, folder in hand, though unopened. I let her have her show. "This color palette," Vera said, motioning to a board filled with swatches, "was my vision from the start. I told them it had to feel elevated, timeless, and the floral arrangements, we want dramatic centerpieces, not clutter." A vendor cleared his throat and turned slightly toward me. "We'll need your signature, Ms. Kalin, before any changes can be processed." The room shifted almost imperceptibly. Heads turned. Vera's confident smile flickered, just for a second. "Oh, right." I lifted my eyes to her, expression calm, lips curved in a polite half-smile. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Inside, I savored the moment. My silence carried more weight than any confrontation could. In Texas business culture, contracts outrank charm. Always. As the vendors continued, they returned to me for confirmation again and again. Every time, Vera's composure cracked a little further. She adjusted her dress, fiddled with her necklace, filled silences with nervous laughter. I sat still, offering small nods, signing where appropriate, making no effort to reclaim credit, but also never relinquishing control. My power was invisible, but absolute. When the meeting wrapped, relatives congratulated Vera on her flawless planning. I stood and closed the folder, feeling the strength of restraint. Sometimes, victory wasn't in shouting, it was in watching others realize you held the strings. Later that evening, the rehearsal dinner began. Guests filled the room, raising glasses, ready to toast the coming marriage. I had prepared a short, heartfelt speech, simple words as Oren's sister. I wasn't planning on making a scene, I only wanted to acknowledge the journey, to mark the moment. When I rose slightly, preparing to be called forward, the MC's voice rang out. "And now, a few words from the bride's best friend." Applause erupted as a woman in a glittering dress stepped up, clutching a glass of champagne. I remained standing for a second, caught mid-motion, before sinking back into my chair. No one noticed, or if they did, they pretended not to. I listened as the friend gushed about Vera's grace, her taste, how she had brought this vision to life. Guests clapped politely, raising their glasses. The sting was sharp, a familiar burn. I had been muted, erased again, and in public no less. Yet this time, I let the silence linger. I didn't push forward. I didn't fight for the microphone. I thought, if they won't give me a voice, I'll speak with action. An old saying came to mind, actions speak louder than words, and contracts louder than actions. My silence wasn't defeat, it was strategy. The humiliation hardened inside me, not into despair, but into defiance. By the time dessert was served, I had made my decision. I left early, folder tucked firmly under my arm. I didn't stop to say goodbye, didn't force polite farewells. I walked through the parking lot alone, unlocked my car, and slid the folder onto the passenger seat. As I drove through the Houston night, headlights cutting long beams across the asphalt, I felt the metaphor forming. My car was slicing through the dark, just as I would cut through the illusions they had built. Silence had been their weapon against me for years. Now, it would be mine against them. The shutdown was coming. At home, I carried the folder to my desk, setting it down with care. I flipped it open, my eyes landing on the first cancellation clause. The power sat quietly in black ink, waiting for me to wield it. They can silence a speech, I murmured, my voice low, steady. But they cannot silence the ink. And ink, when it bleeds, stains deeper than words. The bridal shower shimmered with curated perfection. Houston's most expensive floral designer had filled the room with roses and lilies, carefully arranged for photographs. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and everywhere I turned, guests posed for pictures, angling their champagne glasses toward the light. This wasn't just a party, it was a production staged for social media. I arrived carrying a carefully wrapped envelope, my gift. Inside was a deed to a modest house in Austin, freshly renovated, symbolizing a new beginning for Oren and Vera. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. In American weddings, gifts are more than tradition, they are recognition, respect. I thought maybe this would be the one gesture too substantial to be twisted. I watched from the back as the pile of gifts grew. Handbags, jewelry, luxury cookware. When the time came for Vera to open mine, I leaned forward ever so slightly, allowing myself a moment of anticipation. This wasn't about applause, it was about being seen, even briefly. The MC called out the card, her voice bright. "This one is from..." She paused, scanning. Then Vera's voice cut in smoothly. "Oh, this is from Terrace." She lifted the envelope, sliding out the deed, holding it aloft for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room. Applause followed. "What an incredible gift, Terrace," a guest exclaimed. "So generous, so thoughtful." All eyes turned to my mother. She gave a modest shrug, playing the role of humble benefactor, while basking in the glow of praise. I sat frozen. The words I wanted to speak clawed at my throat. Incredible, yes, but it wasn't hers to give. My fingers tightened around my glass, but I forced my face to remain neutral. Guests leaned over to congratulate her, some even reaching out to touch her arm. My name never surfaced. The applause grew, echoing in my ears like a hammer. I remained silent, letting the moment brand itself into memory. Humiliation deepened, not only because Vera had orchestrated the theft, but because my own mother allowed it, embraced it. Stealing credit is the quietest form of theft, but it cuts the deepest. I pressed my lips together, swallowing the fury. I knew better than to cause a scene in this room. My silence became another scar, one I promised myself would not fade this time. Days later, as if to cement her narrative, Vera launched a campaign on social media. I woke one morning to find my phone buzzing with notifications. She had gone live on Instagram, hashtag glowing across the feed, #Dream Wedding by Vera. I watched as she walked viewers through the venue. "This hall," she said, sweeping her arm with the elegance of a host on a lifestyle show, "took months of careful planning. I wanted it to feel both timeless and personal." She gestured to the flower arrangements, the menu cards, the stage. "It's all about vision," she told the camera, "and how you bring people together to make it happen." There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of the contracts in my drawer, of the checks signed from my account. The entire live stream rewrote history, casting her as the architect of a dream I had built. I felt my jaw clench. The anger was sharp, but beneath it lay a bitter clarity. She wasn't just enjoying the spotlight, she was weaponizing it. Social media in modern America doesn't just tell stories, it creates them. Truth weighs less than image. "They'll hashtag their way to fame," I muttered, "and I'll signature my way to justice." My fingers hovered above my phone as I scrolled through the comments pouring in. What a stunning bride-to-be. Flawless taste, flawless execution. The lie was complete, and thousands were buying it. Anger fused with strategy. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about control. That night, I sat at my desk, the folder of contracts spread open again. I began cataloging every instance of theft, every twisted truth, the stolen gift, the muted speech, the erasure from the seating chart, each one a brick in the wall they built to push me out. I wrote down the names of vendors, the dates of signatures, the terms of agreements. Every hashtag she launched would collapse when the paper trail rose against her. "In Texas business," I whispered to myself, "paper beats publicity every time." I closed the folder with a deliberate motion, the sound echoing in the quiet room. My resolve simmered, steady and unshakable. The final scene came late one evening. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, watching another of Vera's live streams. She twirled in her gown during a fitting, her friends clapping around her, the comments flooding with adoration. Then she looked at the camera, eyes glowing, and said, "We built this dream together." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding with cold fury. "No," I whispered into the empty room. "You built it on my silence. And that silence is ending." Because dreams built on stolen ground are the first to collapse. The sun had just started to creep over Houston, turning the glass towers into blades of light. I stood in front of my desk, staring at the folder spread wide open, coffee cooling beside it. My pen lay diagonally across the papers like a weapon waiting to be picked up. I whispered to myself, steady and certain, "Last night they stole my words. Today, I take back my ground." I pressed my palms flat against the oak surface, grounding myself. In business, I'd learned that timing is everything. Oil prices swing in hours, real estate deals vanish in minutes. The same lesson applied here. Hesitation was weakness. Americans like to say, "Strike while the iron is hot." And the iron had never been hotter. I lifted my phone, scrolling to the first number on my vendor list. "This is artist Kaylin," I said when the venue coordinator answered. My voice was calm, almost casual. "Cancel my reservation immediately. The Mitchell wedding is no longer happening here." A pause. Papers shuffled on the other end. "But Ms. Kaylin, we've already blocked the entire property." "I'm aware, and I know the deposit is non-refundable. I'm not asking for it back. Cancel it. Today." Her voice softened into a tone reserved for powerful clients. "Of course. You'll receive a confirmation email within the hour." I hung up, no tremor in my hand. The next call, catering. "This is Kaylin. Cancel." The florist. "Cancel." The DJ, the photographer, the tent rental company. One by one, each contract snapped shut like the jaws of a trap. Within an hour, my inbox began to fill. Subject lines appeared in bold. Cancellation confirmation, one after another. I clicked them open, each email a clean slice into the fabric of their wedding dream. Every click of my phone was a cut in Vera's vision. Every confirmation, another petal falling off the bouquet she thought she owned. I leaned back in my chair, phone warm in my palm. Silence can be revenge. No shouting, no drama. Just precision. In Texas, contracts don't lie, and the paper trail always tells the truth. By mid-morning, the shutdown was complete. The 2B foundation I had laid beneath their fantasy was gone, dismantled with measured calm. Later that afternoon, I drove across town to a small brick office tucked between two glass towers. My lawyer, Mr. Dalton, greeted me with his usual clipped efficiency. "You did all of it this morning?" he asked as I set the folder on his desk. "Every last one," I replied. "They'll walk into an empty hall." He gave a low whistle, leaning back in his chair. "You're within every right. They can't touch a dime of this, not with your name on every line." "Good," I said. My voice carried no triumph, just certainty. "Then let them learn who truly belonged all along." We sifted through the contracts together, checking clauses, verifying signatures. It was routine until his brow furrowed at a manila envelope tucked at the back of his cabinet. "This is odd," he muttered, pulling it out. "I don't recall reviewing this with you before." He slid it across the desk. It was a copy of my father's old will, one I hadn't seen in years. My stomach tightened as I unfolded the pages. There it was, clear as daylight, my name, once written as majority heir. But a later revision had struck it out, my share redistributed without explanation. I stared at the page, heart hammering. When was this changed? Dalton adjusted his glasses. "It looks like the amendment was filed a few months before your father passed. It's valid on its face, but I remember your father. He spoke of ensuring you were secured. It doesn't match the way he talked about you." My fingers trembled, not with weakness, but with rage. They erased me here too, not just from a wedding, from my own father's legacy. He nodded gravely. The truth always surfaces, even if buried under signatures. I folded the paper carefully, slipping it into my folder. Driving home, my reflection in the rearview mirror felt both familiar and foreign. I compared the two betrayals, the guest list that had cut me from a celebration, and the amendment that had cut me from an inheritance. The pattern was too clear to ignore. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about a lifetime of silencing me, erasing me when it was convenient. My resolve hardened with each mile. If they could erase me from my father's will, then I could erase the illusion they built on my money. I whispered to myself, if they erased me from the will, I'll erase the fantasy they're living on my contracts. Cold fury settled into place. This was no longer survival. This was rewriting the power dynamic. Back in my condo, I laid the will beside the stack of cancellation emails. My phone buzzed incessantly, Oren's name flashing, then Vera's. Each call went unanswered. I picked up the will, holding it in one hand while the phone buzzed in the other. You wanted me gone, I whispered into the quiet, but you forgot the paper remembers. And that paper would be their undoing when the guests arrived to nothing. The morning of the wedding was bright, the kind of Texas summer day where the sun seems determined to blind you. At Willow Creek Estate, luxury cars rolled one after another onto the gravel drive. Guests stepped out in gowns and tailored suits, fanning themselves with programs, expecting roses, chandeliers, and music. Instead, the silence of the empty estate met them. From my quiet vantage point, I watched them look around, puzzled. Women in high heels paused, clutching clutches, their eyes scanning for floral arches that weren't there. Men tugged at ties, murmuring in confusion as they looked toward the grand hall. Children darted ahead, pushing the doors open only to find emptiness inside. People expect grandeur at a Southern wedding. They expect spectacle, abundance, and the performance of unity. What they found instead was an echoing hall with bare tables and silence heavy enough to make even whispers loud. I thought to myself, appearances are everything, until they crack. Inside, the guests shifted uneasily. The tables were uncovered, no centerpieces, no candles, no silverware. The smell of food never arrived. The air carried only dust and disappointment. The quartet that had been booked was nowhere to be found, leaving the space filled with awkward coughs and shuffling feet. Was there a mistake? One guest asked aloud, voice carrying. Another shook her head, eyes narrowing. This place was supposed to be full of vendors today. Where's the staff? The answer arrived with Oren and Vera, stepping in dressed for the day, but looking more like actors without a stage. Vera's face drained of color the moment she took in the sight. Oren grabbed the nearest staff member by the arm. What's going on here? Where are the decorations? The catering? We had everything scheduled. The young man swallowed nervously. I'm sorry, sir. All services were canceled under the contract holder's name. We received confirmation earlier this week. A hush fell. Guests turned toward the couple, murmuring. Vera's lips parted, but no words came. Oren's eyes darted around wildly, sweat breaking across his forehead. I stood outside the doorway, watching the scene with quiet calm. Silence had delivered this blow more effectively than any speech could. Every cancellation email, every phone call I had made had led to this moment, the unraveling of their carefully staged fantasy. Not long after, chaos made its way online. Vera's influencer friend, Thalira, had gone live to try to control the damage. Her phone camera shook as she panned across the empty hall. Well, everyone, she began, her voice forced into cheer. This isn't exactly what was planned, but love is what matters most, right? Behind her, guests muttered angrily. A child cried. Someone's voice rang out clearly. We flew across the country for this. The stream captured Oren arguing with the venue staff, Vera pleading with vendors over the phone, her voice shrill and cracking. The hashtag #DreamWedding by Vera turned into a trending disaster. Comments flooded the live stream in real time. Dream wedding? Looks like a nightmare. Imagine erasing the sister who paid for everything. Karma served. This is why contracts matter, darling. Memes spread faster than wildfire. A picture of the empty hall captioned "Minimalist Chic" went viral within hours. Another showed Vera's frozen smile with the words, "When your sponsor pulls the plug." I scrolled through the feeds, my jaw set but my heart steady. Public image built on theft crumbles faster than contracts voided. I didn't need to add a word. The world was speaking for me. Quiet vindication washed over me, though not joy. Public shaming wasn't my endgame. It was their consequence. The phone buzzed with my mother's name. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice burst through, sharp and panicked. "Artis, what did you do? You've ruined your brother's wedding." I let a pause linger before replying, measured and calm. "No, Mother. They ruined it when they erased me." She exhaled hard, anger rising. "You could have let it go. You didn't have to humiliate them like this." "Didn't I?" I said softly. "You taught me silence was survival. But silence rewrote this event, not me. Their choices did." She sputtered, but I ended the call before she could continue. I sat back, staring at the skyline through the condo's window. Bittersweet clarity settled in. Family had chosen erasure as their tradition. I had chosen silence as my reply. The fracture was now permanent. By late afternoon, the estate emptied of disappointed guests. I stood from a distance, unnoticed, as people filed out with irritation etched on their faces. Oren shouted at staff, his tie loosened, his hair damp with sweat. Vera cried openly now, her mascara streaked, clutching her phone as if another live stream could fix what had been exposed. I watched them crumble, calm and steady. "They thought they could erase me," I whispered, "but instead, I erased the illusion." And the illusion fully shattered when they were forced into City Hall the next day. The morning after the disaster at Willow Creek Estate, guests trickled into Houston City Hall. They wore the same gowns and suits they'd prepared for the grand estate, but now they shuffled uneasily into a government building with gray walls and fluorescent lights. Their jewelry glittered awkwardly under the harsh overhead fixtures, their heels clicking against scuffed tile floors instead of polished marble. Whispers carried through the corridors. "Did you hear what happened yesterday?" "Everything was canceled. Can you believe it?" "I've never seen anything like it." Inside the chamber, metal folding chairs had been lined in stiff rows. There were no flowers, no music, no champagne flutes. The only decor was a state seal bolted onto the wall above the judge's seat. I sat quietly at the back, unnoticed, letting the scene unfold. A thought surfaced, crisp and steady. A wedding once meant to impress the city now hides in its courthouse. People shifted uncomfortably, fanning themselves with manila folders, muttering. The contrast between what had been promised and what now stood before them was unbearable. If you aim for the stars but lie, you'll land in the dirt, and they were knee-deep in it. When Oren and Vera walked in, they looked pale, strained, like two actors stumbling through the wrong stage door. His suit hung awkwardly, her gown clung in all the wrong places after hours of panic and tears. The officiant cleared his throat, opening a small booklet. "We are gathered here today." His voice echoed flatly. Without music, without applause, it sounded more like a DMV line announcement than a wedding. Guests leaned toward each other, whispering, "This feels like filing paperwork, not a marriage." I noticed the bouquet in Vera's trembling hands, clearly from a grocery store, plastic wrapping still visible at the base. Her makeup was smudged beneath her eyes, her smile twitching under the weight of embarrassment. Oren stared at the floor, jaw tight, as if every word the officiant read was a hammer striking him down. The vows droned on. No violin swells, no laughter, no clinking of glasses, just silence and the occasional cough from the back row. I remained at my place, calm, watching their dreams stripped bare, layer by layer. This wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. They had erased me, and now I let the truth stand in plain sight. Then it happened. A cousin sitting near the front pulled out her phone, holding it low. The screen glowed as she pressed record. The ceremony dragged forward until, suddenly, Aunt Bryony rose from her chair. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice carried naturally, sharp as a knife. "You erased the sister who paid for everything," she said, pointing toward me in the back row. "And now look at what's left." Gasps rippled through the room. The officiant froze mid-sentence. Vera's face blanched, her lips parting soundlessly. The cousin's camera caught it all. By that evening, the clip spread across TikTok and Twitter, replayed thousands of times. Comments poured in. Justice served in Houston. Never bite the hand that builds your dream. This is what happens when arrogance meets reality. Hashtags rose quickly. City Hall, collapse. Justice for artists. I sat in silence, scrolling later that night as strangers across the country filled the void my family had left. Public recognition flooded in, not because I spoke, but because others finally did. The internet never forgets. For years, my voice had been muted in my own family. Now millions shouted on my behalf. After the ceremony ended in stiff applause, relatives avoided my eyes as they filed past. The once proud guests now hurried out, eager to shed the embarrassment clinging to them. I lingered until my phone buzzed in my bag. Mother. Her voice cracked with fury the moment I answered. Artis, you embarrassed us all. Do you know what you've done? I let her words hang before responding, calm and precise. No, Mother. You embarrassed yourselves when you erased me. All I did was stop pretending. She sputtered, searching for retorts, but I ended the call, sliding the phone back into my purse. The truth was simple, and simplicity carried the most power. Silence had once been my prison. Now, it was my weapon. When I stepped outside City Hall, the Texas sun hit the navy fabric of my dress, turning it almost cobalt in the light. Cameras flashed in the distance, reporters already calling my name, but I didn't turn toward them. My phone buzzed again, news outlets asking for interviews, journalists desperate for a soundbite. I ignored them. I didn't need their words. The world had already spoken for me. And when Oren finally came to my door, it wasn't as a brother. It was as a man broken. The rain had been steady all day, drumming against the glass of my apartment windows, turning the streets below into ribbons of silver. By evening, the city was wrapped in gray, headlights glowing on wet pavement. I had expected silence after City Hall, expected distance. I hadn't prepared for the knock that came at my door just after 8. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. The sound came again, firm but hesitant. When I opened the door, Oren stood there, hood pulled over his head, jeans clinging damp to his legs, sneakers dark with water. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look like a groom, or even like the golden boy our family had worshipped. He looked like a lost boy caught in a storm. When it rains, it pours, I murmured under my breath. His eyes lifted, red-rimmed, uncertain. Can I come in? I stepped aside silently, watching him drip onto the hardwood floor. I hadn't invited him, not really. But the act of letting him in was already more grace than he had shown me. He hovered near the entryway, not sitting until I gestured toward the couch. He perched on the edge, hands clasped between his knees, rocking slightly as though words weighed him down. I messed up, he said finally, voice rough. I didn't reply. Silence stretched, deliberate. I'd learned it could draw more truth than any question. He swallowed, eyes darting to mine, and then away. I knew she didn't like you. From the beginning, Vera. She said things, made comments. I thought it was just nerves, or jealousy maybe. I ignored it. And? I asked softly. And I thought if I pushed back, if I defended you, she'd call off the wedding. I was scared to lose her. I leaned back, crossing my arms. So you let her erase me instead. He flinched at the bluntness. I didn't mean... No, I cut in, my voice steady. You didn't say it. But you let her. And silence isn't neutral, Oren. It sides with the one doing the harm. The rain filled the pause between us, louder than his breathing. Regret settled in the room heavier than the storm outside. His confession deepened, words tumbling out as if the dam had finally broken. It wasn't just the wedding. She told me you were toxic, that you always made things about yourself, that you controlled with money. I knew it wasn't true, but it was easier to nod, to stay quiet. I stared at him, searching for any trace of the brother I'd once carried on my shoulders as a child. There's more, he whispered. I knew about the will. My chest tightened. I knew Dad wanted you to inherit more. He told me once, years ago. But when the papers changed, when your name disappeared, I didn't say anything. I told myself it was Mom's choice, or that you didn't need it. You had your life together. You were strong enough alone. I let the words sink in. Every syllable was a stone dropping into the well of betrayal I had carried for decades. Strong doesn't mean invisible, I said finally, voice low but firm. I needed a brother, not a witness. He pressed his hands to his face, shaking his head. I told myself I was protecting the peace, but all I did was protect myself. Family that turns away in silence, I said, is louder than enemies that shout. He looked up, eyes wet, shame carved into his features. I know, and I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I just couldn't let you hear the truth from anyone else. The clock ticked on the wall, marking every second of our shared silence. My anger rose, but alongside it came sorrow. His words acknowledged my pain, but far too late to heal it. When he finished, the weight in the room shifted. I stood, arms crossed. You didn't just lose a wife, Oren. You lost a sister. He closed his eyes, exhaling hard, as though the words struck deeper than any shout could have. I walked toward the window, staring out at the rain streaking down the glass. This isn't about repairing anything, it's about truth, and truth is all that's left. He rose slowly, pulling his hood back over his head. I understand. I turned to face him one last time. I'll move forward. Not with bitterness, because bitterness chains you. I'll move forward because letting go is survival. He nodded, shoulders sagging. No argument, no excuses left. When he stepped outside, the rain swallowed him whole. He didn't bring an umbrella, didn't look back. I closed the door gently behind him, resting my hand against the wood for a moment. Blood may tie us, I whispered into the quiet, but silence cut the cord. And in the silence that followed, I finally heard my own voice. The rain from Oren's visit had dried into crisp autumn air. Days later, I found myself standing at the threshold of a private dining room inside an upscale Houston restaurant. Chandeliers glowed warmly above, crystal glasses lined the tables, silverware polished to a shine. Terrace had arranged this family gathering, calling it an attempt at peace. But I knew better. This wasn't reconciliation. It was theater, another performance staged to protect reputation, not relationships. I walked in wearing a simple navy dress, understated yet elegant. A leather folder rested in my bag, its weight grounding me. Relatives glanced up as I entered, whispers passing like static. Every one of them had seen the chaos at City Hall, had watched the collapse go viral. Now, eyes darted between me and Terrace, like spectators waiting for the next scene. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. This time, I knew my role, and I wouldn't play it as their silent scapegoat. The meal began in brittle politeness. Waiters moved quietly, placing plates of salmon and asparagus before each of us. Terrace cleared her throat halfway through, her voice laced with restraint but sharpened with accusation. You destroyed your brother's wedding, she said flatly, her fork clinking onto the plate. The room stiffened. Glasses froze mid-air. I didn't respond. Silence was deliberate now, not forced. It was Aunt Bryony who finally broke. She slammed her palm against the table so hard cutlery rattled. Enough! She snapped, her eyes blazing. Stop blaming her. Artist built everything you celebrated. She paid, she arranged, she carried the weight, and you erased her. Gasps rose from the relatives. Some looked at me, others at Terrace, but no one spoke. For the first time in decades, someone in the family dared to voice the truth aloud. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers for years until it finds the courage to shout. I rose slowly, chair scraping against the polished floor. Every gaze followed me as I reached into my bag, pulled out the leather folder, and laid it flat on the table. You wanted me gone, I said evenly, sliding the folder open. But without me, there was no wedding, no dream, Only contracts. My contracts. One by one, I spread them across the linen. Venue, catering, flowers, entertainment. Every page bore my name, my signature. Vera wasn't here, but her shadow lingered in the silence that filled the room. Oren, seated near Terrace, lowered his head in shame. Paper trails don't lie, I continued. You erased me with words, but ink remembers. Gasps and whispers rippled through the table. I didn't scream, didn't weep. I simply showed the truth, black and white, undeniable. Vindication didn't need anger. It needed proof. I gathered the folder but left the papers behind, letting them sit there like tombstones on the table. My purse slid over my shoulder as I straightened, gaze sweeping the room. I didn't destroy your wedding, I said clearly, voice steady. I just stopped paying for the fantasy. Relatives shifted in their seats, murmuring, but not a single person challenged me. Even Terrace, lips pressed tight, sat frozen in silence. I turned, walking toward the door with calm steps. Each stride was a severing thread, each breath lighter. Family doesn't always mean belonging. Sometimes survival means walking away. The Houston night air hit me as I stepped outside, cool and fresh, sweeping against my face. Neon lights flickered across the street, and traffic hummed like distant applause. I breathed deeply, lighter than I'd felt in years. They thought silence was weakness, I whispered to myself. They forgot silence, sharpened, becomes the final word. I walked on, free. And in choosing myself, I finally chose family, the one I will build, not the one that buried me.